Inspire Instructor podcast, where the learning never stops. Welcome, you wonderful people, and thank you for listening to the Inspire Instructor Training podcast. We've got a great episode coming up for you today. So we've got Emma Cottington on the show. Emma is really great, to be honest, and just has this amazing way of getting things across. So definitely looking forward to that. We discuss a little bit about mental health, and which is Emma's speciality, and also then we dig into our competency, which is all talking about the technical information being correct, appropriate and timely. So we dig into that. Just want to have another reminder that if you're not already a member, to come and join us over at Inspire. And we've got plenty of courses and Zooms coming up, so lots going on over there, and we just want to help you become the best instructors that you can be. So without further ado, on to the show. Welcome to the podcast, Emma Cottington. Lovely to have you on.
Thanks for having me.
It's all right. I've listened to you quite a lot on Terry's podcast and on our 6 for 60 podcasts, and definitely thought we need to get you on the podcast and share your wisdom with the rest of the podcast world.
Oh, well, I'm glad you see me as wisdomous. We shall see what this produces today.
Yeah, we'll be the judge of that.
Yeah, I'm not going to blow my own horn too early.
So I've started this year's episodes with a sort of question from the industry, or question about the industry, just to have a discussion point. And so I wanted to relate today's question about your, what I would say is expertise of dealing with mental health. So driving and instructing jobs, it's an interesting job in that it can be quite lonely because you're on your own, and a lot of the time on your own in the car. And it can be quite stressful because you're dealing with stressful road situations, and also the pressures that pupils put on us with things like driving tests and waiting lists and demand like that. I think there's also the element of the pressures of not wanting to say no to someone if they're looking for lessons and stuff, and they give you the sob story, and you think, oh, okay, well, I can fit you in on Saturday or whatever. So there's lots of kind of like pressures, stresses, loneliness, no one necessarily there to sort of kind of talk you through it. Or so my question is, what would your advice be to instructors to deal with those different pressures?
I think the first thing, and I'm finding myself saying this an awful lot, is nip it in the bud. You know, as soon as you're noticing, a heightened stress level, sort of, and when I say nip it in the bud, it doesn't need to be anything sort of extravagant. You don't need to start speaking to a mental health specialist, or you don't need to kind of go down that route. But sometimes we don't recognize on a day-to-day basis, particularly at the moment, because it is quite a stressful industry now more than ever. With pressures from waiting lists and things like that, particularly if you're in the training environment as well. I mean, across the board, but particularly if you're in the training environment too. And I think because we're living it day to day, and it's just kind of become, this is how it is right now, we're not necessarily actually addressing the fact that we're stressed. We're just going, well, this is how it is, and this is what I've got to do, and this is how I've got to get on with it. When we don't challenge ourselves to go, well, actually, I don't want to feel this stressed, and I don't want to feel this much pressure. And as much as we can change outside influence, like we haven't got the ability to walk in the DVSA and change all the systems as much as I think most of us would love to be able to do that. We can't control these outside influences, or not to a greater extent anyway. So I think my biggest advice from a mental health perspective would be to control what you can control. Start saying no if you need to. Start looking at your mental health from a perspective of, when was the last time I asked myself if I'm okay? when was the last time I actually asked myself, how am I feeling? And dig a little bit deeper with that and figure out, if you don't get an answer that you want, you know, I always think to myself, if I wouldn't answer that question of, am I okay, in a way that my best friend answered it, I wouldn't be happy with their answer, then I shouldn't be happy with my own answer either. If I ask my best friend, are you okay? And she give me anything, even any little shadow of doubt that she's not, I would be questioning that and finding some solutions with her. And I think we're very quick to not do that with ourselves. Um, Ask ourselves if we're okay. And if we do ask ourselves, we tend to ignore ourselves when we don't get the answer that we want. So it's just dig a little bit deeper, be kind to yourself.
Yeah. I'm see this is interesting because I think I'm rubbish at this.
Hmm.
Um in that sort of kind of but the flip side of it is I don't feel like I feel like I'm pretty positive person. I'm pretty chilled person. I don't tend to get stressed about stuff. But I also don't dig very deep into my mind, which maybe why I'm not stressed about it. I just like, yeah, whatever. Um, and so for someone like me who maybe because you said there and dig a little bit deeper, in my mind when I was like, what does that look like? And like, so for someone like me who's sitting there going, I've not really necessarily dug into this sort of kind of stuff before, like self-evaluation, I suppose, but not from a performance point of view, but from a mental point of view. Do you have any techniques or any tips and stuff that people can sort of dig into?
Yeah, and I think you can relate this to what we're doing day to day. When we ask a question to our learner driver, we don't often take the surface answer unless it's a closed sort of technical question, providing the answer was correct, we might close the conversation then. But if we're generally getting our learner drivers to take some responsibility for their learning, we don't typically stop at the first answer that we get. And I think that can relate to us with regards to mental health. Don't stop at the first answer that you get with yourself. Sort of, your first question was, am I okay? How do I know I'm not okay? you know, from there, you're going to get kind of a broad yes or no umbrella, probably. I am all right or I'm not all right. Um, and it's important to look at if you are okay or you're saying that you are, that you ask yourself, well, why am I okay? What is it that I'm managing well right now? Because as much as we get our learner drivers to build a toolkit that they can pull from, we should be building a mental health toolkit too. So if we're in a place where we're great and everything's all wonderful, well, why is it wonderful? What's going well for me? Why am I managing this really, really well? And you build in that mental sort of toolkit, if you like, that if you do come across something that's a bit stressful down the line, you can reflect back on and you can go, okay, so when I was in that scenario there, I was okay, but this scenario is a bit more challenging. What's the difference and what can I pull out of my toolkit to sort of help? And then I think it's recognizing that everybody is different. People aren't going to dig as deep into those layers. Um, you know, and that's okay. Sometimes people can't do that. If people want to dig deeper, the best tool I can advise is the sort of I think it's called the emotions or the feelings wheel. If you type that into Google, it'll come up, or I can send you a PDF over. Um, and basically, it starts with our base emotions, which are tend to be sort of happy, sad, angry, fearful, whatever. But underneath that feelings wheel, it'll give us kind of all the emotions that could sit underneath that. And we can actually start to reflect on ourselves lower than the surface feeling that we're feeling. And it's quite often when we can get to that under the surface feeling that we can actually start to process, well, why am I feeling this way? Quite often people will say, I'm angry. And then you'll say, well, why are you angry? And they can't tell you. They can't actually tell you why they're angry or why they're sad. People can't sort of go beyond that surface emotion that they're feeling. And a feelings wheel or emotions wheel can tap into that deeper level, and actually people can go, well, actually, it's frustration, it's not anger. That would come underneath there. So it's people can then tap in, and then from there, when we've got that little bit deeper, we can actually go, well, why am I feeling frustrated? What was my trigger in this moment, or what have you? And that's how I would kind of guide somebody who typically can't get past that sort of surface emotion to be able to go that sort of little bit deeper in an easy way.
Like it. I like it. Yeah. What I also like there is a lot of the questions you were using are very similar to what we ask our learners to do, like you said,
Absolutely.
when we're training them to drive.
Mhm.
So yeah, that's quite interesting. Earlier on you said about nipping it in the bud and spotting the first early signs. What what can those signs like be?
I think, I think the first one would be the obvious one of just generally going, oh, I'm stressed, feeling yourself, feeling that sort of that irate frustration or whatever you want to label it as. Um, or, my first warning, typically is when I feel that I haven't got enough time. So that first warning for me is I don't have enough time for this. I don't have enough time for this. And then I actually know that that's actually coming from probably a panic perspective, and that I'm probably feeling a little bit worked up. And actually, my brain then is going, if we tell her that she hasn't got enough time, she'll calm down a bit and she'll try and create some time somewhere and I'll slow her down. So my brain's reaction then is to try and kind of get me to slow down or what have you. So that's typically mine. But I think when it comes to nipping it in the bud, it's difficult because not a lot of people get that first understand that they've had that first warning from their body or their mind that something's not quite right here. And I relate this back to what I said on Terry's podcast when we did the first mental health one last week, is all of us have only got a certain capacity for stress, and the capacity that we've got is very different. So everybody's container for stress is going to be a different sort of size and shape. So some people can take more than others. Um, and that can be influenced in all sorts of different ways. We can strip that right back to childhood if you want to get really, really deep into it, and our stress containers are built from when we was little and how resilient we've been sort of encouraged to be throughout our lives. And resilience typically gives us a bigger container. Not always, but typically does. So I think that overpouring of that stress container will come out for everybody in a very different way. Um, and it's about kind of tapping into yourself when you're just not feeling quite right. You know, a really, really simple way, and another link back to our industry is stick it on a scale. Stick it on a scale of 1 to 10. How am I feeling today? One being I'm pretty naff, 10, I'm over the moon, and figure out where you are on that scale, figure out why you're feeling that way, and figure out what the deficit is, and I think it's a really simple technique, but again, it's going to give you probably quick things to then go, actually, I've been feeling a 4 or a 5 now for the last 5 days. So now I'm going to start questioning myself on what I'm going to do to sort of figure that out. And then it's then moving into, well, what is your relaxation technique? My first go-to is getting some music on dead loud. That brings me down straight away. And I'm sure my neighbours really love that when that happens. But that's my first go-to, but it won't be everybody's go-to. Just the same as somebody else whose music is go-to isn't going to listen to the same soundtrack as I am. The go-to music for calming is going to be very different to mine. Mine's normally like loud Guns N' Roses, Aerosmith, the type of music that I want to listen to, where somebody else's could be classical to calm down. So it's knowing yourself. I think my mantra for the last few years has been know yourself. If you know yourself and you start to learn about yourself, because not a lot of us learn about ourselves, then when you know yourself, you know what to do.
Yeah, I like that. I also like the fact that your neighbor's stress levels go up as yours come down. Uh,
Yeah, yeah.
um, the so with all of this then, so these and again, it's quite interesting talking to you about it because all the way through that process, I'm seeing the sort of kind of you're effectively coaching yourself. It was and so it is very similar to what we're doing in the car. Like you've got the
Yeah.
scale in there. You were talking about coming up with solutions and how your solutions are different to everyone else's, and it just links to what we
Mhm.
do in the car. When so a lot of these things you're sort of kind of talking about, it sounds like you're effectively talking to yourself in your mind. Is that the right way to go about it, or is there a or is writing stuff down better, or like is there a better way, or is it just again working for what works for you?
I wouldn't recommend keeping it in your mind because we can ruminate them. When things go round and round in our minds, we don't actually give them the opportunity to be processed. We almost sort of stick them on a hamster wheel and keep them turning, and the idea is that we get them off that wheel. So I would absolutely recommend that you process whatever is going round in your mind. It typically might go round in your mind for a little while before you pick up on it, and then you're going to go, actually, I've been thinking this now for the last however many days. I need to kind of start dealing and processing with this. Um, so I'm a massive advocate for journaling. I think journaling is probably my go-to, and I typically write for that. And I think a lot of people would make a connection with journaling that's about writing down, and it's not necessarily, you could voice note yourself and just keep a record. You could write it down. You could record yourself somewhere and keep it a bank. Sometimes I've known people to email themselves and keep it in a folder in their email inbox. It's just a way of kind of getting it out of your head. And whatever way works for you, because not everybody is pen and paper based. I am very much still pen and paper girl. I'm not moving with the times in that respect, but it's my best way of processing. There's something with me that putting pen to paper really works for me. So there's journals and journals and journals in this house. And you might not ever go back to them, but the fact that you've got them out and off your hamster wheel means you process them, or processing them. And you can begin to deal with stuff then.
That was kind of what I was going to, my next question was do you need to go back and have a look at them? Because since listening to you and Terry talk on the Instructor podcast, I did re-download the native Apple Journal app. So they've got it was quite new actually. It's only really the last update that they brought that
Yeah.
out. And I love an app. So I'm the opposite. With like it feels weird when I write stuff down with a pen now. I do it so little. And it yeah, very much. I think what I like about and to be fair, it's only been a few days since, so I'm not exactly like a master of this, but you were able to sort of add photos from the day, and so I was sort of kind of able to put a little photo of like what that day kind of meant to me, sort of kind of thing, and then also I like the fact that it's just on my phone, so I'm not like there's not a particular time I have to do it. It's just if I felt that and I've not even necessarily said that I'm going to do it every night or anything like that because I don't think that would work for me. It would become a chore.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so it happened to be the other day I had a bit of spare time. I was sat in the car on my own. And I was like, oh, just put a few things down now, and then maybe, and it could be more than one thing on each day, and it was just like jotting my thoughts down. So yeah, but that was one of my questions was like, am I meant to be going back and looking at this, or am I just like, is it the whole point of just it's a moment of I suppose it just creates a moment of self-reflection.
Yeah, it is. It's just a moment of self-reflection. It's just a moment where you can get some stuff out of your head, like I said, get it off that hamster wheel, get it down somewhere. If you choose to go back to it, you might, there's journals that I've written and I've never even opened them again. And then I've got all the journals that I know was from a particular time in my life that was sent me on this path really because my mental health was bad. And I have gone back and read those journal pages because I knew I always date it. I think it's important to date things. So I could revisit that sort of moment in time and sort of look at how far I've come, as a reflection tool. But there's absolutely a lot of journaling stuff that I absolutely just don't go back to. There's a really good app for people who don't necessarily want to write down their emotions, but could express it in a sort of either a video format or a picture format, just from a facial expression, which is really, really good. I'm trying to remember the name of it. I'm sure it's called something like one second a day or something like that. I can confirm and you can put it in the show notes, but when I have a look. But that's a really, really great tool. And you literally just take a picture. But at the end of the year, it will give you a reel of all of the pictures. So it's sometimes I've known people in the past to do that, and it's good to kind of go back and watch your face on every day to sort of see, your face is telling the picture really of your story.
Yeah, no, yeah, no, I've heard of that app actually. It's quite interesting. It's quite similar to actually, just before this season the podcast came out, I put a little reel of everyone's top tips from last season.
Yeah.
And Terry sort of joked that my beard gradually grew as we
Yeah.
went through. Um, and yeah, so yeah, I think that's quite an interesting way to do it. I do like the idea of like if I keep up this sort of kind of journaling thing is I would love to go back 5 years and see what I was
What was
talking
going on?
about, what I was talking about then, yeah. And I think because when I do get that a little bit is Facebook memories.
Yeah.
But you look at Facebook memories and you see from like 10 years ago and you go, I would not write that now. Um, and, so yeah, it's interesting to see how you sort of kind of evolve as you go along. There was one
Absolutely.
more thing I wanted to ask you before we move on. Was you talked about your stress bucket, I think it was the
Mhm.
word you used. And some people have bigger buckets than others because of past lives and other factors. Is it better to have a bigger bucket, or is it just it's a thing? It's not. It's like there's no judgment on it.
Yeah, I wouldn't say there's any judgment on it. I think it's important to not put any judgment on anything with regards to mental health anyway. But um, I don't think having a bigger, for me, and this is just my opinion really, than sort of anything that I've kind of learned or a theory that I've processed or anything. For me, if you've got a bigger bucket, you can carry more shit. And that's not always a good thing. It
That's what I was
depends
thinking.
on how, yeah, exactly that. It just depends on kind of how you view your bucket. So again, I think it would come down to your perception of your bucket. Because some people will say a bigger bucket means you've got more resilience. It's not necessarily about the size of the bucket, it's about the amount of crap that's in there. So you could have a really, really big stress bucket, which would be your resilience. And if there's nothing in it, great, it's working because there's nothing stressing you out. But if you've got a really high tolerance for resilience, so you've got quite a big bucket, but it's ready for spilling, it's all well and good being resilient, but if you're still continuing to carry stuff that's stressing you out, you're still carrying that load. So, it's important that we put the load down and we empty, as much as we can and figure out what's stressing us out, deal with it, process it, and move it on. So the size of your container doesn't really matter. It's the size of the stuff that's in it.
Nice. You need a big empty bucket is what we're looking for.
Yeah, we want a big empty bucket. Yeah, exactly that. That's much easier to carry around.
Yeah, brilliant. Okay, great. Yeah, no, thank you for that because I think it's the sort of thing that it interests me, and I think I should be better at it.
Mhm.
It to be honest, and it worries me being better at it because I think I live on this surface level and it's okay for me. And I worry that if I dig deeper, I'll just spiral. Um,
Not always.
um, so, but yeah, no, I'm sure people will find that fascinating, and I do think that if anybody is interested or wants extra I've been sending everyone your way. So, um,
Amazing.
give them a call, or a message. So shall we move on to our competency?
Yeah.
So today's competency was technical information given comprehensive, appropriate, and accurate? I'm going to start this with how I always start this is what are your thoughts, Emma?
I think the first thing is to break this one down into the three things because ultimately this is asking you to do three things. It's asking you to be comprehensive, it's asking you to be appropriate, and it's asking you to be accurate. So I think from a training perspective, we don't see people break this down enough. I think it's brushed over a little bit of just know your stuff, which it is on the surface,
It's literally what I said
but
to you before
we
we
want to
came
dig
on.
deeper.
Yeah,
Um, so yeah, I think it's important to understand the meaning definition behind each of those words first.
Yeah.
And I think for me, this can be then broken down again in a more digestible way. But again, this is just my opinion of a digestible way. Is it accurate? Is it relevant? Is it timely? And I think as long as the information that you're given kind of ticks those boxes, then you're ticking the box in relationship to answering this question on the form. Um, but yeah, that's my base.
Please. Yeah. Yeah, no, I agree. And okay, so let's dig into them a little bit more. So accurate. The that is your know your stuff bit.
Yeah.
Um, so
Mhm.
if you had a PDI or an ADI come to you who was struggling with that, what would your advice to them be?
I think about accuracy. I think for me, I think the first thing I want to say is go easy on yourself. Like none of us here, and I think it's one of the things that really does bug me in the industry sometimes that we get a lot of people shouting that we should know everything. And yes, we should know a lot of stuff. Yes, we should be classed as the expert in our field, but we're human. We are absolutely human. There is going to be things that you're going to be posed a question at some point that you don't know the answer to, or you know it, but not well enough to give a comprehensive answer. So I think my advice, particularly with a PDI, I think we're harsh on PDI sometimes. We've got to remember they're coming in on the baseline. They haven't got years of experience yet.
Yeah.
I'm trying to learn everything about a car and how to drive it and the road systems and all of this other stuff that we need to know. And kind of pushing on them that they need to know all of this stuff before they're qualified, I think is harsh. Because yes, we do have to be accurate, but we're not going to know everything. And I don't profess to know everything. I absolutely don't. I'll hold my hands up and be vulnerable with that and go, I don't know everything. I absolutely don't.
What's
Um,
quite interesting is I regularly, if I'm going to answer a technical type question, particularly on Facebook,
yeah,
I tend to look it up first. Like
absolutely.
I know the answer, but
Hmm.
I want it, but if I'm going to put it out there, then I want to know I'm like bang on perfectly right. And so and that's just maybe me and my way of doing it. I'll go and make sure because I want to make sure that I'm putting out the right info. Um, Whereas I suppose someone else would just ask the question on Facebook, and
Hmm.
that's where then people are going, "Oh, how do you not know that?" And in reality, maybe they did, but they just wanted confirmation, and their way of doing that was via Facebook, and my way would be Google the hell out of it.
Yeah.
Um, the but
Think it,
you only know what you know, and
exactly.
I actually had a PDI recently who um didn't know that you could that and I had no issues with this and he was really embarrassed and I was like really don't be like it's just like you know what you know and it was about going through like not going through a red light to not just that wasn't the end of the sentence because then I feel like you would have been embarrassed no not going through a red light with a like emergency vehicle waiting behind you
Okay.
and it was the sort of thing he was like, and what was really interesting was his pupil did know because she'd watched the blue light video, um, blue light aware video. And I was just like, it's fine, you found a gap in your knowledge. That's not like if you asked most of the general public, they would probably also say go through the red light. Um, it's not a weird gap in your knowledge. You obviously haven't come across that in your training yet.
Yeah.
You maybe didn't come across it when you were doing your part one. You skimmed across it on in driving essential skills. Maybe it just didn't kind of come up. I sent him the
Yeah.
video, and now he knows. So it's
Yeah.
like I think that's the thing is like you just yeah you don't beat yourself up about it. You're right.
Exactly. And something, given what you've just been talking about there, having information about that topic, a lot of that is learnt behavior.
Mhm.
I didn't know that till I started to train to be a driving instructor. So if I'd have continued my life just as a driver and gone into a different career at some point, I would probably still at this moment not know that because my learnt behavior as a driver is watching the police come up behind me in a queue of traffic and watching the person who's at the front go through the red traffic light or at least going through it enough to move over to allow the police to come through. So my learnt behavior is watching other people. And if you see so many people doing that, of course you're going to start believing that's what we do because that's what everybody's doing. That's how humans work. And I think my only advice here is that, don't put pressure on yourself to know everything because none of us do, even the most experienced of us. I've been in the industry now for 14 years and I do not profess to know everything because I know I don't. There are certain things that will come up on Facebook or on a podcast, and I'm thinking, do I know the answer to that? Or do I comprehensively know the answer to that? I can probably give a bit of an answer, but do I know it enough? And I think the important thing is to recognize that every day is a school day, and that if you don't know something, then go and find out, and that's okay. It's okay to not know something. And I think it's really valuable as well to sort of say that we show our students that we don't know everything. I think it's important for them because if we're teaching them that they're responsible for their learning and that once they pass their test, they will continue to grow as a driver and that they will continue to learn things as things come up. Um, then but then we sit there in the passenger seat professing that we know everything. What kind of story are we telling them? That once you've passed your test, that's it, you stop, you know, and that there's no responsibility for any learning here. It's much better that you go, that's a really good question. I want to give you the correct information. Let's find it together. Because then you're learning and you're showing them how to find this information as well in the future. If something comes up for them in the future that they don't know, that, Facebook keyboard warriors aren't the way to find the answer sometimes. Not saying that it's always. We get some really good stuff on Facebook from people who go out there and research before they put their answers in and things. But making sure that they know that the things like the essential skills book exists for them to go and find these answers. Use your highway code, it's free. Download it. Here's how you find out the answer. Let's find it together. I've done that with learners in the past when I do know the answer so that you're building up their responsibility for finding these things out for themselves as well and showing them how it can be done because ultimately for a lot of stuff in life if we're not shown how to do it or we don't have a conversation about how to find this stuff, how do we find it?
Yeah.
We're not born knowing this stuff.
Setting them a bit of homework is quite good for that sort of thing. Like
Absolutely.
teach me about that is quite a good one to use. The Yeah, Facebook's an interesting place to ask those sort of questions, isn't it? Because
Mhm.
I think opinion-based questions are all right. Maybe factual-based questions isn't the best because you won't, like you say, you'll get different responses from different the people. I tell you something that I do with knowing the answers, sort of kind of and continuously building on that is you said about sort of downloading the highway code. So I have both the highway code and driving essential skills as a Kindle version on my phone.
Mhm.
And so got the Kindle app on my phone and then use the Kindle version because I effectively have the highway code and driving essential skills in my pocket at all times.
Yeah.
So if ever a question comes up, I have those two to reference. And I've done it quite a few times on Facebook where there's been a question and there's been a multitude of different responses, and I've just chucked the screenshot of the driver essential skills going, this is what driver essential skills says, as a way of sort of kind of answering that question. And I think that can be quite handy, and also then handy. And I suppose in the car you want to have the books so you can pass them over to your pupil, but you don't always have the books with you. You're not always in the car, and so having them on my phone is really great. And the other bonus about that is I can search with a Kindle, so
Yeah.
you can search the terms, so you can then quite quickly jump to the bit of information that you need. So yeah, that would be my bit of advice for anyone that is struggling with that sort of thing. And you going back to what you were saying right at the start about sort of yeah, be kind to yourself because uh, yeah, it's a bit like Instagram, but everyone lives their Instagram life
Yeah.
and then they have the real life behind. And I think you can have this with knowledge where people see people's responses on Facebook and things like this and think, oh, they must know everything.
Yeah.
But they don't know that they haven't gone and just researched it before they've put it on and they didn't know it and now they're just looking really clever. And I think there's maybe an element of that is everyone else is also going around not quite knowing everything and learning it as they go, and it takes time as well. Like you've got to come across these situations, like that situation I said with the blue light. He obviously hadn't come across it in any of his training, maybe just with the train. Actually, he didn't really do all of his training with me. Um, sort of came in at a later date, and maybe he just hasn't seen the blue light videos, and it just hadn't come up, and and actually it may not have come up if it hadn't have been the fact that we had a emergency vehicle behind us on the lesson. It started a conversation. He said something, I was like, oh, that's not right. um, and then jumped in and gave him that learning opportunity. But if that ambulance hadn't been behind us, he might still be driving around not knowing that yet.
Yeah, exactly that.
But he'll learn at some point.
Yeah, it's exactly that. And I don't kind of the thing is there is so much information around driving, so much. And we can't ever stop learning because there's always something, we can't know everything down to the last dotted I and crossed T. We can't, like, it's just not humanly possible. There is always something that we might just have a surface level understanding of, and we could know more, and it's just us then taking responsibility as trainers that we go and find out that information too if we come across it. And like you said, there's going to be a whole wealth of stuff that me and you are both sat here now that we don't know about purely because we have not come across it in life yet. Not necessarily relating to driver training. We probably know quite a good lot of that because we've been doing it for a long time and we're trainers, but there is still going to be gaps in our knowledge, or there's still going to be something that you know more than I do, or I know more than you do. And that's where we've got to then kind of come together as an industry and be more supportive of the fact that I know more than you or you know more than me, and we help each other with the gaps.
Yeah.
That's what we are encouraging our PDIs and our ADIs to do with their learner drivers. Why aren't we doing it with each other?
Mm.
You know? And it's just that taking responsibility. And I think almost being vulnerable and not trying to live the shiny social media life of I know everything and I'm perfect, because none of us do. None of us do. None of us know everything. And yeah, it's just making sure that we take responsibility.
I agree. Um, so um,
I'm glad.
jumping back to this being a competency on the part three, or standards check, is there any things you see that particularly get marked down like quite regularly, like, or examiners like look out for with the sort of accuracy, certainly the part of it is that, like, the one I'm thinking of is mini roundabouts that catches people out where they say try and go round the mini roundabout, and it
Yeah.
says you must go round the mini roundabout, and just little stuff like that. Is there anything that you can think of in there?
Yeah, and I think that comes down to one knowing with the example that you've just given there is the knowing the difference between must and should
Hmm.
from a highway code perspective, and an understanding that we know which one's which, and therefore then what we're and a lot of it comes down to terminology. A lot of it comes down to terminology, what we say and how that comes out, how has it been received?
Yeah.
So it's almost sort of giving out that knowledge, but also then checking the understanding too. Um, because we've got to be really, really careful that how one person says something isn't necessarily how it's interpreted and how it's received either. So we've got to be really, really careful. I think the one that pops to mind for me is right of way and priority.
That's literally the other one I was thinking of. Yeah.
Yeah, that's the one that comes to mind for me. I see that a lot, a lot. Um, you know, and again, I think that comes from learned behavior. So that comes from we listen to people saying he's got right of way, or I've got to give way to him, or and how they say it. And I've been guilty of it again in the past. I've been guilty of saying things, and it really does come down to that terminology of being accurate with the words that you're using. So what you're trying to say can't be landing in a grey area. We want it to land as black and white as we possibly can.
Yeah.
And that's not always possible, but we can be sharp with it.
Well, what I find interesting about that one, because I would always advocate saying priority over right of way. Partly because in my head, right of way sounds like it's a right, isn't it? It sounds like I get to go sort of kind of vibe
Yeah, it's
to
quite
it.
arrogant, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And that then maybe gives you that mentality on the road of like forcing people to stop for you, that sort of kind of vibe. But they are just words, those two, like they are just and like you said about making sure you check and understanding, you saying priority to a pupil in their head, that could mean the same like the same feeling I would have if someone said right of way. Like they
Yeah.
might think priority means like I'm in front. Like if you think of a priority queue at like a Disneyland or something.
Yeah.
Like you get to go first.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
These idiots get to stand like and wait for hours.
Yeah.
Um, so they might have a different meaning in their own mind. So I think you're 100% there that it's not just about saying the right words. And I think you can actually get away with saying the wrong words if you're clarifying the meaning with the pupil. And I think there's sometimes um it goes against kind of like the coaching ethos, I think, sometimes with this. Like I tell you one that gets everyone is driver faults and minors. Now
Yeah.
I am fully in the driver fault camp. And it
Yeah.
and it, and it makes me go, oh, every time someone says minor. But I'm not actually I never correct a pupil with that. I would correct a driving instructor because a PDI because I think they should know the difference. But and it just because it makes me twitch. But I wouldn't correct a pupil because I think that breaks rapport, and I think you should be using your pupil's words as long as you're both sure that you're talking about the same thing.
Absolutely, exactly that. It is all about clarity of understanding. One of our five essential skills is active listening. Now, for me, this is actually the number one. This for me should be number one of those essential skills. I suppose we could argue the toss for all of them, but for me, this is the biggest one because this is the one that is going to make sure that the conversation and rapport that you're having in that car is working for both of you. What's been said is being received, and what they're saying to you is also being received in the correct way as well. Because the words that they're using might not actually be what we're understanding, and there's a really big difference between those two things. And when we think about this competency, we're really on the surface level dealing with either a lack of knowledge. There's a lack of knowledge somewhere, a gap in knowledge somewhere with this learner driver, or there's been a risk management issue that's brought up the need for this competency. So if you're thinking of along those lines, that you go back to what we say about coaching earlier on, this competency lends itself a little bit more that this isn't always going to be about coaching. This is about client-centered learning, and it's looks right back to what we've said earlier, in that if they don't know, they don't know. No amount of questions that you ask that learner driver is going to get you the answer if they do not know the technical information to the question that has been presented, you know? And at that point, we can't use coaching questions sometimes to fill that gap in knowledge. If it's not there, it's not there. And we've got to come in, and that's where we have got to be then accurate and appropriate and comprehensive, because now we are lending ourselves into a more of an instructor role, for want of a better word, where we've got to fill that gap because that learner can't fill it for themselves. Now, don't get me wrong, I wouldn't necessarily jump straight down that path. I would ask a few questions at first, but if it's quite clear that that learner driver is blank, completely blank on this, and this is a complete gap in their knowledge, you've got to fill it. That's your job.
Yeah.
You've got to
I
fill it.
interestingly had this conversation talking to Fiona Taylor the other day as well, which actually I think comes out after this podcast. Spoiler alert. So it's really interesting because the conversation I remember sitting in the back of a lesson and the PDI was doing that. He was trying to get like Phil's in the back. I must ask questions, and the pupil in the end said, "I don't know what you want me to say." Because he guessed enough times, and
Yeah,
it wasn't even necessarily technical information. I think it was actually the PDI trying to get out what the issue was with that junction or something like that.
Yeah.
But you're right. Sometimes they just don't know, but I think you can still make it coaching.
Hmm.
In there is not, and it's this sort of concept that you're not allowed to tell in a coaching conversation. And you absolutely can. You can raise their awareness
Absolutely.
of an issue, or add in some technical information that the person doesn't know. I think the bit that you then make it coaching is you get them to analyze what you've said, and that's why as I always say to my trainees, that if you've added to that conversation, if you've added a nugget of information or a raise their awareness of an issue that they've got, the next job is to get them to analyze what you said. So tell me the advantages of that. Talk to me about the disadvantages of that. Or if it's a technical information thing, what does that make you feel like, think and feel like?
Mm.
And that's where it goes back to becoming coaching, because you've given them information, but you haven't just expected them to remember it.
Hmm.
You've said to them, analyze it, and that's where the information goes in, and they then own that information.
Yeah.
So yeah, you can absolutely sort of kind of link it back to coaching, and there is nothing wrong with telling sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this is where it's got really blurred over the years. There's that many voices, isn't there? There's that many voices talking. I mean, we're two of them, so
Yeah,
I can't criticize. There's lots of voices talking, but a lot of it's opinion based. And I think for me, and again, it's my opinion, is that we're not pure coaching and we're not pure instructors because we're in a moving, dangerous classroom. We can't lend ourselves to being either of those things fully. And that's why we're classed as client-centered learning. That's where this umbrella comes from. And client-centered learning for me is a scale of both of those things, and that scale will shift. There's going to be times that you're purely up there in the coaching ranges, but there's going to be times that it's going to tip because it has to, because you have to fill the gap in knowledge because it's not there. You'll come back into using your coaching techniques when exactly what you've just said, you're then deepening the understanding around that, because it's only when we put that understanding around that actually they're going to start to learn, and take it on board for next time.
yeah. I'm intrigued about this. Like, just moving slightly away from what we're talking about with the competency, and we will come back to it. But just from this whole sort of kind of mental health and counseling sort of kind of side of it. So we talked about that. You talked about there that driving is like a safety critical sort of kind of environment. But in let's say you were having a counseling session with someone, and I'm assuming you're using all the same sort of coaching techniques and conversations. I'm assuming it is the same where if they didn't know, you would add information. But I assume it would also be the same as if they were suggesting solutions that were dangerous to them, not in that moment, but maybe in the future, you would intervene in the same way you would do in driving.
Yeah, sort of. I mean, without going like down a massive rabbit hole, it hugely what a lot of people don't understand about counselling or know about counselling is that there's actually three broad modalities of counselling. So it would actually depend on the modality of counselling that the person's presented for.
Okay.
So yeah, we could go down a massive rabbit hole. The umbrella, if you like, is, or the most sort of large modality is person centered, which is client centered. It's all about the person in front of you. My job is as a counselor is actually to not present them with, unless I'm doing a different modality of counseling, is not to present them with a solution. It's that belief that it's going to come from within, the same as we think and feel that learning comes from within. My counselor hat tells me that my client has got their solutions within them, and I'm just there to facilitate them finding it really and bringing it out. Um, the only time that would be different, and this has to be actually contracted in counselling, would be if they presented me with harm to self or others, or if they presented me with something like fraud or money laundering or drug trafficking. Anything like that is a flag for me, and I have to intervene, just the same as we would risk manage on the road. That's me risk managing, I guess, in that scenario. Um, so yeah, without going down too much of
No,
a
that's exactly kind of what I was getting at, and it just intrigues me because I think everything we do in the car, you can see it in that sort of kind of that background of coaching or counseling. And you can see it in other industries like life coaching or business coaching and stuff. They're all the same stuff.
Yeah,
It's just
absolutely it is.
asking different questions about the car, and I suppose it just shows it works, because if it didn't work, so many different industries or walks of life wouldn't take on this style of learning. Um,
Absolutely. It's for everything that I'm doing at the moment, the biggest education that I'm getting is actually the top and bottom of everything I do is making sure that the person I'm working with is the center of it. And as long as that person is the center and I'm just a facilitator, then I'm doing my job to the best of my ability. Whether that's in the car, whether that's in the counseling room, whether that's doing podcasts, to some extent, or speaking to people about mental health. Everything is making sure that that client we stay in their frame of reference and not mine. Because as soon as we're coming into my frame of reference, we're using my words, we're using my terminology, and the chances are that other person's then lost because they're not in my frame of reference the same way.
yeah,
So it's just centering that person.
love it. Um, so can we move on to relevant?
Yep.
So what does that mean to you in this context?
Um, I think the first thing that comes to mind with relevant is it necessary right now? You know, does it need to be dealt with? Is it like a risk management situation? And I think this is where we start getting the questions of, should I pull over for this? Or can we discuss it on the go? Or, it's that weighing that up, and that brings in the timely a little bit. I suppose really the accurate, relevant, and timely you can't really have without the others. If one slips, they all kind of snowball, don't they? But yeah, for me, it's relevant. Is it relevant to the goal? Is it relevant to risk management? Which route are we going down here? Um, do I need it as a level of intervention, or is it actually a level of instruction? So which route am I going down with that? That would be how I would process relevant, and then that would lead me into timely. At what point, once I've worked out which avenue it is, what timing do I need to deal with this? Does it need to be dealt with right now, or can we wait till we finish whatever this agreed loop on the goal was, and then we'll discuss it? It just sort of depends on that, and not jumping in ideally at the incorrect time. We can jump in too soon, we can jump in too late.
Yeah, which links to some of the other competencies, and in a way you can get in the way with jumping in and you become the problem in the
Yes.
car. The other thing I think with relevant is, and I think a lot of PDIs sometimes struggle with this, knowing when to bring stuff up and when not to bring stuff up, is bringing up topics that aren't within like your goal, aren't necessarily going wrong either, so we're not needed to save it, and then it sort of muddies the water of the lesson. So I'm thinking, like for example, driving past a pedestrian crossing and there's not really much going on, and the people's dealing with it fine, and they've looked in the mirrors and they're all good. Like, do we need to have a conversation about pedestrian crossings when we're heading into dealing with whatever, like whatever else, roundabouts, for example?
Mhm.
Um, because is that conversation about pedestrian crossing going to then overlap, and now you're going to get to the roundabout and you're still talking about the crossing, and it gets in a bit of a mess.
Yeah.
And I think that's where it wouldn't be a relevant conversation to have for what you've decided to work on. The flip side of that though is the competency where it says did the instructor use opportunities to clarify learning outcomes?
Yeah.
Now, if there's a situation there and there's a person walking towards the crossing and the pupil hasn't quite noticed, or something like that, then absolutely we're having that conversation. Or if there happens to be something particularly weird about this pedestrian crossing, like maybe poor visibility or something like that, or there's a
Mhm.
person parked on the zigzag lines or whatever, then yeah, let's use that as a learning opportunity. Um, and so sort of finding that balance, I think, about when do we bring that in and when do we not, and there is no perfect answer to that, because there's so many factors. It depends on your level of your pupil, how long it is between that pedestrian crossing and the roundabout. Maybe
Yeah.
I've got time to pull over and just have a quick chat about that pedestrian crossing because you want to add that learning opportunity. But there's so many different factors, but you kind of got to just gauge it. Like, does it feel like it's going to get in the way? I suppose would be my question, my answer to bring it up.
Yeah, I think, I think my term in training is, have we gone around the houses just to get to the same point anyway? Did we need to do all of that to just get to 2 foot in front of us? And I think it's that division, and I think it does get very muddied. It does, and I can see why. I can understand why. I get it. And I think we get a lot of black and white thinking with this, and I think what I mean by that is typically more from a PDI, you might get somebody who says, well, if this thing happens on my part three, or if this thing happens on my standards check, how do I deal with it? Do I pull over or should I? And I'm like, well, I can't answer you
Yeah.
because there isn't an answer to that question. There isn't an answer to that question. Similarly to alerting a driver saying, will I stall on my test? If I stall on my test, will I fail? Well, I don't know. Give me some context,
Yeah.
And the context is the important thing. I think we read the question and we want a black and white answer.
Yeah.
Well, actually, there isn't one, you know, and you've got to get to the answer, but how you get there could be all sorts of multitudes of different ways. And I think for me, if you prioritize the fact of it being risky, was it a risk to us or others? Did we affect somebody else? If it wasn't a risk, did we still affect somebody in regards to, did they even have to come off the gas to allow us to do what we did or what have you? Even if it wasn't necessarily high risk management. Um, and I would go along that scale. And then if it's, the less sort of risky it is and the less goal related it is,
The
it's not
lesson.
relevant.
Yeah. That's
It's not relevant. Leave it alone.
yeah, definitely. No, no, yeah, I agree. It's interesting you were saying about how not being able to answer that question. My instructors tend to joke that whenever they ask me a question, my answer is always it depends. And they've now started asking questions and putting it depend. You're not allowed to say it depends on the end of it. Um, because it just does, it always just depends on so many different things and the context of that conversation. So yeah, relevance. Yeah, I like that idea of having it on like a little different scale of how risky is it and how um yeah, how much do we like, and with it, and I would probably add into that scale of like how weird is it as well, because I think it's important to not miss like the ambulance is quite a good example that
Yeah,
I think if
yeah,
an ambulance turns up, it's a good opportunity to have a conversation,
mm,
even if it's not behind you.
yeah,
So we were having because it's a learning opportunity that's presented itself, and I
mhm.
remember sitting in a lesson once, and there was an ambulance coming on the dual carriageway the other way. And the PDI actually said, "Oh, that's a shame it's not behind us because that would have been a great learning opportunity." And I said, "Why isn't it? Let's have a conversation." And we spent the next 5-10 minutes dealing with like how and we linked it to the goal because we were doing dual carriageways and we were working on like awareness and planning on dual carriageways, and so I said great, let's work on how you would deal with an ambulance now. What would you do if there's an ambulance behind
Yeah,
us now? Like, how far back can you see if there's an ambulance? Would you be able to hear an ambulance? And so we brought how to deal with emergency vehicles on dual carriageways, and it was a great learning opportunity. So I think
yeah,
sometimes you can bring it into your goal. The other thing I sometimes sort of talk about with this when we're talking about relevance is something we sort of kind of preach quite a lot is teaching skills, not topics. So
mhm,
when we're talking about teaching like awareness, planning, anticipation, judgment, and things like that, rather than like what my example earlier about the pedestrian crossing and the roundabout, now you've got two topics and they don't seem to link. But if you were
mhm.
teaching awareness on roundabouts or judgment on roundabouts or anticipation, you can absolutely bring in the pedestrian crossing now because you're
Absolutely. Yeah.
talking about like how would you anticipate blah 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 on the crossing. And so that then allows you to make the lesson about everything you're doing because it's anticipation everywhere, not just on the thing that you like. Yes, you're going to focus on roundabouts, but your anticipation is everywhere, and I think that
Mhm.
that can be really helpful when you're on those bits between the roundabouts, thinking, what am I going to talk about? There's nothing to
Yeah.
talk about, and actually you can talk about your anticipation in these scenarios as well.
Yeah, I mean, I like to sort of call that embedding, embedding knowledge and sort of getting them to think outside the box. Sometimes, a learner driver will typically only deal with what they can see there and then. They don't think about, well, the 5 times I've come to this roundabout, there's been nobody on that crossing. So, but they're not going to think about the time that there's somebody is. And then generally when there's somebody on the sixth go on that roundabout is on that crossing, they don't know what to do with it because for the 5 times previously, we've not had anybody, and we shouldn't really be waiting. I mean, I suppose this is going into your learning outcomes competency more than anything. And I think, we shouldn't be waiting for the actual physical opportunity to happen. We should be talking about it anyway. I think where that links to this is when it comes back to the timely element of this. You know, I've been known in the past on driving lessons with learners where we might have had an ambulance, for example, going the other way or not sort of interfering with us at that moment in time. But let's say that our goal was traffic lights and this ambulance presents itself at this set of lights, not necessarily for us to deal with, but it's there. And I've stayed on goal because our goal is traffic lights and we're on top of those traffic lights right now. So as much as there is a learning outcome there to be had and there's technical information to be given that I want to be comprehensive with, the time's probably not right now because it's not actually affecting me. And my way around that sometimes will be, right, what I want you to do is we're dealing with a set of traffic lights, we're doing X, Y, Z, so we're staying on goal. But I want you to remember this junction with the ambulance. And as soon as we get the opportunity to pull over, we'll have a discussion about it. So it's getting them to sort of embed the moment, but not having to deal with it right now. So the learning opportunity and outcome still can still be addressed, but from a technical information, comprehensive, appropriate, and accurate, it's not relevant right now to me. It's not part of my goal. It's not part of my risk management. And that's how I would probably separate learning outcomes from this competency.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah,
that timing element.
I call that put a pen in it.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
And absolutely you can do that and bring that up. I'm just looking here at the on the ADI one, the competencies to bring this up. And to be fair, the what the examiner's looking for and what the examiner's not looking for are just the opposite of of the previous
yeah. They absolutely
on
are
this
on this one,
on
aren't they? Yeah, I've got them in front of me as well.
yeah, the one interested on that catches people out is checking, understanding, and if necessary, repeating and demonstrating or explaining. The I think that's possibly where maybe people get. We have kind of mentioned it earlier about checking, understanding, but I would say this is other than saying the wrong thing.
Hmm.
Um, I think that's probably where people get maybe marked down more so on this, where they say the correct thing but don't check that understanding. I think that's possibly one of the biggest things that catches people out.
Yeah, and I think this loops straight back to active listening
Yeah,
because if we've not because active listening isn't just about the spoken word. So at the point that we're giving the information that we're giving, whatever that technical information might be, then we should be watching for signs from our learner drivers through sort of like body language or even just tone of voice in regards to whether actually they have understood, and quite often if you're using active listening well, you can tell whether somebody's understood it or not understood it. And I think it links as well to your learning styles too, because if you're presenting this technical information, for example, if I came to you for Phil, I need some technical information about this, and you just sat and spoke at me with all of this technical information, I've got absolutely no chance of remembering any of that, none whatsoever, because that just does not work for me. If I listen to an audio book, I have to read it as well. I just can't listen to, I can't. My brain is too busy thinking about, did I put the washing on? And oh, I need to do the such and such thing on Friday, and I've not listened all of a sudden to half a chapter, you know?
I've done that.
So
The amount of times I have to go back, back. Yeah, no, I wasn't listening then either. Back.
yeah,
Yeah, okay, right. We can start again. And just
yeah,
like,
and how aware are we that certain things don't work for us, yet we'll barrel down our street with our learner drivers who don't aren't on our street, they're on the next street. They're learning in a completely different way to us,
yeah,
but we're barreling down our street anyway, you know? And I think that's what's really, really important with that um part of the ADI one, um, is that the failure to check understanding. I think a lot of people will think that if they've said it and they've gone, did you get it? And your people goes, yeah, that's it, we've checked. And actually the response there told you that they didn't.
yeah,
No, and that's where it falls down. We don't actively listen and pick up on the bits that's not said.
yeah. I think my solution to this, other than obviously, like you say, listening with your eyes,
Yeah.
the is I always get my pupils to analyze or anything that I've said. So if I've given them a bit of technical information, I will say, well, what do you think the advantages of that are? Are
Mhm.
there any disadvantages of that? And by getting them to do that, I know that they've understood it because they're having to analyze it and work it out for themselves.
Mhm.
And they gain ownership of that information by doing that as well. So they're buying into and not just going, well, yeah,
Yeah.
my instructor said that.
Mm.
It also stops the and I've had this actually and I was very disappointed in myself when it happened. Where a pupil has said they've come up. I can't remember the exact thing that happened, but they said they did something, and I said, oh, well, I asked them, well, what happened there, and they said, well, you told me to do that, and I was like, I did not, because that is not right. Don't do that. And we went back through the conversation, and they just misunderstood what I'd said, and
Yeah.
I clearly hadn't got them to analyze it. And I wonder if anybody like listening would they can probably think back to a moment like that, or even when you get pupils from other instructors, and my other instructor said this, and you're thinking they can't have said that. Like no one's that unknowledgeable. And again, I think it's just that they probably haven't said that,
Mm.
or they said that in that moment at that time because it was relevant for that one moment. But they haven't got the people to analyze it. So I think for me that's the biggest thing I would say here is get your pupils to analyze the situation that you've don't give them the opportunity to say yes I understood, like they
Yeah.
have to actually tell
It-
you.
yes,
Yeah,
exactly that. There's been times where I've said to them, we've done whatever, we've discussed it or what have you, and then I'll say to them, okay, so if you was to teach me now, what would you say to me?
yeah,
If you had to tell me how to do X, Y, Z, what would you say? And you check in their understanding that way as well to see if there's any gaps with it or whether, they're happy with, with what they've said and stuff. But yeah, I think it's just that checking in, isn't it? But I think it's really important, like you say, is to just not give them the opportunity to say yes, because sometimes a lot of them will say yeah, even if they mean no, because they see you as the expert. They want to please you because you've spent this time helping them understand. You've told them this information that they didn't know before. They don't want to sit there and go, actually, you're making no sense at all, and I don't know what you're talking about.
yeah,
A lot of the time they'll just be agreeable because they're in that environment where they feel that they need to do that. Um, and yeah, that's just gonna how it's gonna be. I mean, obviously a level of rapport wouldn't necessarily take them down that road all the time, but it still happens.
yeah. You don't want to feel stupid, do you?
No,
Like
exactly.
you
Yeah.
feel
And they've got a
like,
level of respect for you ultimately as well. But, you know, you are more knowledgeable than them. So if you're filling in the knowledge for them, they don't want to tell you that they don't understand.
yeah, no, absolutely, yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I get that. And like I said, the way around that is to not ask them a question. I think this also, I've had this conversation a lot recently with a couple of instructors who've got into trouble with this with foreign language people who English isn't their first language, or there's very little English. And the that comes up a lot, I think, in this scenario where you try and explain something and then you say, does that make sense? And of course they're going to say yes, because it's awkward not to. It's they're not going to get it any better the next time because they don't sort of like the language isn't there and they're not understanding it. Um, and again, I think it's a situation you can't give them that opportunity. Like it has to be you explain it to me. Now, obviously, that then can be difficult with language,
Mhm.
um, but you can do it other ways, and it says that in the thing is like another one of the positives here is finding different ways to demonstrate or explain to a pupil that does not understand. So that is absolutely a barrier here. Language happens to be the barrier rather than understanding.
Yeah.
So can we use a diagram? Can we use Google Translate? Can we I even had a I can't remember, it was Diana Todd explained it to said that she does this where it was, I want you to just explain it to me in your language. No, I'm not going to get everything, but I'm going to pick up a few words and sort of maybe get from your body language. And you can quite often go, I think they get it.
Yeah.
And just them being able to explain it in their own language helps them process it.
Yeah.
And so you can definitely do that. But even like using Google Translate in that scenario might help. You can literally just set that thing and like it will tell you what someone's just said. So it's there are ways around it, and I think that's part of this as well with all these competencies. Different learning styles, different solutions to different problems. I think that's what we're kind of looking at.
Yeah, it's a toolkit, isn't it? It's that whole sort of saying of one size does not fit all. It really, really doesn't, and it's finding those different tools. And I think, I am under no illusion that 14 years into this, that I've filled my toolbox. There will be at some point a pupil that presents something where I pulled every tool I've got and it doesn't work. And I've got to find another way. I've got to find another solution. And, you're digging deep at that point to find those solutions. But I think it's not forgetting that probably the solution is going to come from the learner driver, not you. And that's just a toolkit that you can use in the future because somebody's brought you that tool and you can go, I'm going to use that again. That worked really well for them. It might work again for somebody else. And that's how our toolkit is built. It's built between us finding, other solutions and pulling things out of the bag. And it's also asking them, what's going to help us understand this? How would you normally process information like this? Or can you think of something that we've done so far on this learning journey that is going to help us here to understand this bit of information? Have you been stuck before and we found a solution? Could we use that same solution here? And it's just pulling on everything that you can and not just sort of accepting yeah or no, I don't understand or I do, because that's not going to move any of us anywhere.
No, I must admit those sort of peoples that are challenging are my favorite because, like you say, that they're the ones that fill your toolbox.
Yeah, absolutely.
I,
You're
I
growing as well, then.
I have solutions that I use from a pupil that I can remember. It was when I first started, so 17 years ago, and this probably to this day is probably one of the people that took the longest to learn to drive. Like it was a long time.
Mhm.
And he still holds about three or four of the top 10 scariest moments in my driving career with those people. But because it was such a challenge, he built like, and actually I'm grateful for it because it was early on. I had to really sort of dig into some different solutions with this pupil, and I think a lot of those then helped other pupils. And so yeah, I think if you've got one of those pupils, like hold on to them because
Yeah, absolutely. I literally had a conversation with one of my PDIs recently. She's got a particularly challenging student at the moment, and I just said to her, I said, like, no, don't give in. It's very easy to go, oh, I can't help this person. I'm not trained enough. I've not got enough knowledge. I've not got enough experience. I said that you're going to be learning from each other in this scenario, and you're going to learn more than ever, what it's like to be a driving instructor from this pupil. And, I'm here to support you, but you're gonna learn a lot as well just in the car with them. And you really are, you're learning together.
yeah, I also don't think necessarily having loads of experience it must help a little bit, but one of my like most recent pupils was one that I'd probably taken out for the longest I've ever taken as well, and so like I don't think me having 17 years experience made made a difference there. It's
No.
that pupil was going to struggle no matter what. And again,
Yeah,
they had to dig into new ways to find ways for the work for them.
yeah, absolutely. And and I think that loops right back to the client being the center of that scenario, doesn't it? Our experience is only as good as the stuff we know. Again, something we've said today, and it's great when we've got experience. And I think the same with everything, with experience comes no new knowledge, doesn't it? And knowledge that we can pull on from the past. But it also, we never stop learning, we never stop learning. And I think it loops right back to what we said right at the beginning, that none of us should be professing that we do, because we
Yep.
don't. You're always going to be presented with something that you've not come across before, or a challenge that is going to be particularly difficult, and your toolbox is going to be withered by the end of the lesson because you've tried everything that you've got and things, and you might not come up with a solution there and then. It might be several lessons down the line that something changes for that pupil. You're not necessarily going to fix everything in that one session.
Yeah, I like that. And I agree. We never stop learning. And
No.
what's quite interesting is the trainers that I respect the most in this industry are the ones that I see that actively never stop learning.
Mhm.
And don't like, I remember this isn't necessarily the definitive list, but I remember I'm not going to list all the instructors, but I just know people might be listening that weren't on this. I remember going to watching Terry Cook's last Meganar,
Mhm.
and I remember looking down the list of people that were there, and obviously there was like over 100 people, about 100 maybe ish people, but some of the top trainers in the industry watching that thing, and it just made me think, well, yeah, that's why they're the top trainers in the industry, is because they get an opportunity to do some CPD like that, and they jump on it, and they're
Yeah.
there and training. And I think that is something I've tried to sort of kind of say all the way across this kind of like podcast, is that we never stop learning. And you should, and I'm probably preaching to the converted, to be honest, because if you're sat listening to a podcast, you're probably interested in CPD.
Yeah.
But that's for me probably, I would say, the most important thing I've ever done within the industry is not, and from day one really, never stopped sort of kind of like constantly going on new courses, constantly reading new books, constantly doing all these sort of things, and interacting with people, having these sort of conversations, because it's, yeah, you never stop learning.
No, you don't. And those are the people who get my respect too, because I think those are the people that, for want of a better word, wouldn't kind of, if I went to them for help and support and they didn't know, they wouldn't try and bumble their way through it either, just to sort of pretend that they do. They'd be honest with me, and say, actually, I don't know that, but such and such a body might, or go and read this book, or what have you, and I think there's something quite humbling and respectful about that. And they are the people that get my biggest respect, because the chances are, if somebody is openly admitting that they don't know everything and they want to continue to grow and they want to continue to learn, then ultimately they're also not reflecting on me as a trainer of, she should know all of that. They're
Yeah,
not giving me that sort of tarring me with that brush, because if they're happy to sort of be vulnerable and go, I'm still learning, then they're gonna know I am too.
that's really interesting. Actually, I've never even actually thought about it that way, because I've only ever thought about it as that I want to completely learn. But it is interesting that there are people that I probably wouldn't go to for that question because I would feel judged.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, I think the list that I'm thinking of in my head would be trainers who, you're right, wouldn't judge you for not knowing something and would willingly support you for whatever. Yeah, no, absolutely. What a lovely time to wrap it up.
Yeah.
Unless you have anything to add to this competency.
No, I think between us we've kind of ticked everything that I had written down. So that was in my little head with regards to this competency. But yeah,
Did you do a mind map for this?
I have one.
Nice. I was wondering whether you would have done.
That's how I prepare for everything. Everything goes on a mind map.
Um, so do you want to take a second before we get to your top tip to tell everyone where they can find you?
Yeah, so typically the best place will be social media, as it is for everybody. So everybody can find me through my personal profile, which is just Emma Cottington. My driving school and driver training is Up Driving School. I generally get the question of why Up Driving School. And it's quite simply because I'm a massive Disney nerd and that is my favorite film. So that's where we went. Or they can find me through the Learner Driver logbook. And for mental health stuff, jump over to Terry's podcast. There's going to be a dedicated podcast for mental health over there, and a lot more from me, social media wise too.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that. More episodes of your ADI first aider, first ADI. I can't
First
remember what
aid,
it's called.
yeah, yeah.
He's gonna kill me for not getting that right. So I'm disappointed there's not a balloon on your logo though for up.
Well, this is yeah, I did go down that route to be honest. When we there's plenty of logos on this desktop, when we was looking at it, yeah, and I just didn't go down that route. But yeah, I kind of wish I had now. Maybe I could rebrand.
I don't know. It's yeah, because you've got like the road going up, and it kind of makes sense. It makes it seem like a driving school. Yeah, I think
Yeah,
if it was a balloon, wouldn't be as recognizable.
yeah, people get a little bit lost. Maybe I'll just stick loads of balloon decals all over my car or something.
That's why I've got cows over my car, so uh, so yeah, it works.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah.
What would your top tip be for driving instructors?
My top tip for driving instructors is know yourself and be yourself. I think we can get very lost in the fog of voices around us. And I think, you know, be yourself. Because if you can be that, you're going to attract the people that are genuine anyway, because you're being genuine. Um, Congruence is one of my biggest values, is, about just being yourself. And that attracts like-minded people quite naturally. And the other side of that of know yourself is to tap into the stuff you don't know too. Be vulnerable with that, admit that you don't know it. I think that's important, particularly for this competency. But in life in general, it's much better to be vulnerable and admit that we don't know something, but we're willing to find out or we're willing to learn, than to lie about it and say that we do know something or be inaccurate with what we say because we don't know. So yeah, that is my advice.
Thank you. That's lovely. I'm not going to even add to that because it was good. Um, um, all I have left to say is thank you for coming on and sharing your wisdom, which we said at the start. So I would say we'll agree that you're wisdomous. um,
I'll take it.
yes. So thank you. Yeah, thank you for coming on.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Inspire Instructor Podcast, where the learning never stops.